Welcome to Regent Leadership Live. My name is Colin Pinks, Director of Regent Leadership. Today is our second session talking about leadership in the modern world and some of its challenges. Today's topic is the fourth industrial revolution and some of the leadership challenges for it. Today I'm joined by Graham Bird. Graham is a leadership consultant with Oxford Leadership, one of our partners. And also Peter Holliday. Peter Holliday is Director of Strategic Projects here at Regent Group. Also today I'm joined by Kylie. Kylie will be bringing in some of the questions from social media.
Yep, and you can engage in the conversations, pose questions to our guests by using the hashtag #ExecEducationTV or commenting on any of the video streams, and we'll try and put those questions directly to our guests live.
Fantastic. So just before we start, Graham and Peter, just a little bit of introduction about yourselves, about your background and relevance to the leadership area. Graham.
Yeah, my name is Graham Bird. I work with Oxford Leadership. We're a global leadership consulting firm. We have a network of around 220 consultants and coaches working in around 20 countries. We work with some of the largest organisations in the world, and we specialise in leadership development and executive coaching.
Fantastic, thank you. Peter.
So I'm, as you say, I'm in Regent Leadership Group, Regent Education Group, I should say, and we're at the moment I'm focusing on strategic projects, but really that comes after the last 17 years or so spent in organisational change within largely the education sector. Prior to that, I had 20 years in the military, which I guess sort of leaves its mark. And particularly my time sort of spent at the Joint Services Commander Staff College thinking about strategy, operations, and how that now translates into sort of what I've done after my time in the military. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic, thank you. So we'll kind of kick off by saying we're kind of talking about the fourth industrial revolution today. We kind of, when you look at the web, it's talking about the first is about steam, the second is about electricity broadly, the third is about computing, but the fourth is kind of a bit almost ambiguous. What's your idea of what the fourth industrial revolution really means for us?
Yeah, well, when you asked us to come and talk about this, I did a bit of reading, and absolutely, you know, these sort of previous three industrial revolutions are quite clearly sort of defined, even down to some dates. And something I thought was quite interesting is that the third one is supposed to have ended just before the First World War. And then apparently we then had to wait until the sort of 1980s before all the stuff around computing has happened. The gap's quite interesting. Maybe we weren't having any type of industrial revolution because we were too busy with conflict. But I also read that the sort of computer generated information generated third industrial revolution, it was very much ongoing, so I guess we're still sort of in that. Absolutely. Whilst we are also in supposedly the fourth industrial revolution. But for me, and I think, you know, as I look back over my working life, and the differences and changes that have occurred, it very much feels like we're at a time of sort of joining up all of the different advances in all of the different fields, and technology, information technology sort of, you know, predominates, I suppose, for most of us.
So, Graham, what do you think?
Yeah, I think in some ways the so-called fourth industrial revolution is really an advancement or an evolution of the third in many ways. And the third was the beginning in the early 60s of the computing era, with mainframe computing, which then became moved into home computing, and of course the advent of the internet. But now we're seeing cyber systems now that are joining up computers with machines and with people. So it's about it is really about connectivity, I would say. But major advancements in robotics, in 3D printing, autonomous vehicles, biotechnology, nanotechnology, you name it. We're just where it is different from the third industrial revolution is the spread and the speed.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the conversation we hear about being the connectivity and the rate of change is increasing, so that's creating the globalization, more data, more sensing, more kind of just more interactions, which I think is a great challenge for people.
Yes.
How do you think, what are some of the problems created by that kind of we're kind of looking at the moment from a human point of view?
Personally, I think the speed of change. I think that these advancements are happening so quickly now, and again, that's some difference between the previous three, where there was a time before the impact of whatever the new technology was would filter out into societies, and organisations. But now that speed, that change is happening very, very quickly, and it's going to affect countries and it's going to affect companies. And is affecting, and I think one of the dangers is companies or organisations being unprepared for it.
Yeah, interesting. Peter?
Right, yeah, I did read the other day that we're on the cusp of a place where the technology starts to work for us instead of us working for the technology. Although from experiences with information boards at Waterloo Station last night, we're not quite there, I don't think. But in terms of problems, I mean, there are far more data points, I suppose, and we're helped by machines that can process those for us. But at some stage, we've got to interface as people and decision makers in this system. We've got to interface with all of this technology, try and make some sense of it, try and make some decisions, and try to get other people to act in line with those decisions.
Yeah.
So I guess in terms of leadership, C-suite leadership, it's the same problem as it's always been. It's about how to understand the environment and the people you're working with, and to make cohesive, good decisions and enact them. It's just that the environment is a lot more complex now.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the challenges we often talk about Regent Leadership is about that needing adaptability and flexibility to react to that rate of change that we were expecting, and so therefore trying to how do we put things out there that can meet some of those challenges.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges for organisations, as I said a few moments ago, the speed of change. And a lot of organisations, especially old, larger organisations, tend to be quite bureaucratic. And decision making tends to be a fairly slow process, and that is just not going to work at all. So the challenge that leaders have, I think, of those type of organisations is to become more adaptive, to become more agile, more flexible, delayer, faster decision making through autonomous network of teams rather than the old hierarchy. But I think another problem, like most things, these things present advantages and disadvantages. I mean, it's a wonderful world we're moving into. It's fantastic that I can pick my phone up and speak to whoever I want to, or I can find out information, and I can turn the heating on. I don't have that system, but I know I could. Turn the heating on at home, even get my car ready.
Absolutely, starting the car in the car park.
Pull it, back it out of a parking space. Fantastic advancements, but there's also a dark side. The fourth industrial revolution supposedly is going to create massive wealth. Something around, if I remember correctly, around $15 trillion of global GDP in the next 10 to 15 years. Where does that wealth go? If it's distributed to the few, then it's a problem. If it's distributed to the many, in other words, if it can be used to help improve our world, then massive advantages.
Yeah, exactly.
The point you raised there about sort of bureaucracy, and agility is interesting. I mean, I personally don't think it's an either or, and I think there is a temptation to confuse agility with quite a sort of reactive stance, and I do think that the organisations that can best survive and thrive in this new and emerging environment are those that can get stability in the structures and systems that they absolutely need, but can create a culture that means that teams and individuals within those kind of well-defined boundaries can have sort of maximum freedom of action and responsiveness.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's not a simple answer to this. I think that's the great challenge of a part of this, which is where we're going. I was just going to say, Kylie, have we got the next? Now we've started the
there's quite an
conversation, where
interesting
we go?
question that's come in here about, a lot of the time when there's conversations about the fourth industrial revolution, we talk about disruption and disruption in the market. In terms of the leadership world, is having this new set of skills an opportunity for the new leaders rising in the ranks to disrupt the non-agile kind of leaders of old?
Yeah, I suppose you're talking about the sort of digital generation and people that have grown up with that technology. And I suppose my working life has been through the dawn of this sort of fourth industrial revolution. I've taken back to time in the military, and I was on a communications course dealing with communications technology, and sitting in a room and looking at a Strowger telephone exchange, which is purely sort of mechanical, and and actually
visualise it in the corner of the room, humming in the middle of the
I'm
room.
sure it's probably sitting in the in the Science Museum or something like that now. But huge changes, and then it's the old story, isn't it? But you look at your children and how quickly they can get to grips with this technology. Again, even people that have grown up and are very familiar with that technology, they still need to work in teams. They still need to implement things. They still have to deal with the complexity and the other channels that maybe they're not so familiar with. And I think the leadership challenge again is making sense of that and giving them a framework within which to operate and make the most of those skills that they've got.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we were talking earlier about the idea of a lot of the work that has been done by machinery, by humans, is now becoming machinery, and so therefore almost the emphasis on human communication is even greater because it's a bigger part of what we do. Have you got any thoughts about that, Graham?
Yeah, I think organisations need to adapt. The larger organisations are at risk from the smaller disruptive industries, of course. I mean, these startup companies, there's a lot of these tech companies are very agile. They're working in a completely different way, and that's can be a problem. But at the end of the day, no matter what the company is, whatever size it is, whatever industry, it's all about people. So I believe that we've had this mantra for many years about people being the most important asset, or I prefer resource. But now I think it's truly important to really develop people and harness the potential that people hold, because at the end of the day, the company will only ever be as good as the people that it employs.
I think when we were talking earlier, you were talking about people being, probably one of the key things left by which you can differentiate and gain competitive advantage. It's your ability to harness the skills and attributes of your people in the best way in what is fast becoming quite a sort of benign and neutral technological environment. You know, I mean, it used to be that only the big companies could get access to IT. And I was reading yesterday that, you know, apparently this new iPhone with an A11 processor gives me, you know, artificial intelligence and machine learning in my pocket, you know. So we've all got access to that stuff.
Absolutely. So using it effectively, I think, is
Yeah.
the great challenge, and
Yeah.
and particularly the communication and the people side.
Mm.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to think about what does this mean? What do we want more of, and what do we want less of when it kind of comes to these things? Have we got anything on that, Kylie?
Yeah, a little bit along those lines, really, about, you know, what does that really mean then about the behaviours and the capabilities that leaders need to develop in order to get that out of their teams, in order to perform in this new world? Maybe what is it about those leaders of those disruptive companies that are so agile that's different, that makes a success of what they're trying to do in whatever marketplace they're working in?
I think the key to engagement for people is that they have a sense of meaning in the work that they do. And that, of course, then is a responsibility of the leaders, the C-suite, if you like, of an organisation, to instill a sense of meaning in it, or purpose, as we call it. And I think leaders need to understand and need to be able to communicate the purpose of their organisation. And when I talk about purpose, I don't talk about profit. I don't mean profit. Profit is always a result. But having, you know, why does the company exist? You know, I've worked with doctors, for instance, in the past, who have said to me, you know, Graham, I joined this profession 25 years ago because I wanted to help people, you know, and I've lost my way. I've become an administrator or whatever, you know, I've lost my sense of purpose. So I think when a company has a strong sense of purpose and everybody understands that purpose, they buy into something more powerful than just a paycheck at the end of the week. So it's not about motivating people, it's about having people work in a system that they feel that there's reason to get up in the morning and go to work. And that can be done in many, many different ways.
Exactly. Challenges.
I mean, just, you know, chiming with what you were saying earlier about, you know, younger generation. I think with everybody having access to information now, you know, the good ideas can come from anywhere in an organisation, and I think that the companies that can engender a culture that harnesses those good ideas sort of wherever they come from, and then can reorientate quite quickly, and you know, probably by having set ways of working that enable interoperability perhaps between teams, so that they can reorientate and retask quickly, then they're the companies that are going to succeed, I believe.
Yeah, it's interesting when, you know, it's that often we kind of talk about silos. I think I talk about large organisations as still kind of in that kind of thing. I think one of the challenges I've always felt is how do you then kind of do the other way? So if you're kind of silos that way, how do you do that? Have you got any thoughts about that, how we get those kind of things happening rather than going, oh no, it's an intractable problem?
Well, again, I think it's about encouraging the opposite to silos. So in other words, you know, having teams working together rather than being in competition with each other, which is often the way. They're competing against each other, and of course, you know, it's like they're all rowing in different directions. And I think it's about encouraging, and you use the word culture, and I think culture is absolutely essential in this kind of conversation, that the culture of the organisation is one where people feel empowered. I don't like the word, but they feel empowered to be able to make decisions without having to go through a long chain of decision-making authority, where they have a sense, as I say, a sense of meaning in what they do, a sense of pride in what they do, and working together. Yeah, I know nothing about football, absolutely nothing, but I do know a football team, or any other team for that matter, to be successful has to be one. While they're on the pitch, they play as one, and to me, it's no different in an organisation. If people are rowing in the same direction with the same sense of mission, the same vision, if you like, then that's got to be as good as it gets.
I think, you know, on the subject of culture, I mean, you know, culture, you know, how we do things around here. I think gone are the days where a company can say, you know, this is the way we do things, and actually the reality be something different, because organisations with social media are completely porous. So if an organisation is not true to things like its sort of stated values, that will out, and there's lots of examples of key people that have been have found themselves in the media because they haven't been acting in a way that's consistent with the sort of values espoused by the organisation that they're leading. So
it's that kind of authenticity question again, isn't it? It's that kind of because you can't hide anymore. So therefore, how do you make sure that you walk the talk and all those kind of classic cliches?
Well, we work with leaders, and we believe that leadership begins with the self. In other words, you can't lead others if you can't lead yourself. And what that actually means is we have to have a leader has to have an understanding of their behaviours, their triggers, the strategies that they've learned over their lifetime. What are their good points? What are their bad points? And that isn't a simple thing to do. There is we take leaders away on what we call leadership journeys, and we spend several days with them exploring, going very deeply into looking into themselves. What is their purpose? I ask leaders, what's the purpose of your leadership? Is it ego? Is it about a title and a salary and a nice car and a pension, everything else, or is it you want to make a difference in the world? And there's a big difference between the two. Leadership is about having followers, obviously. And the question then becomes: do followers follow you because they have to? And what that means is, well, it's my job. He says or she says what I have to do, and I do it. Or do they follow you because they want to? And there's a whole difference in energy in those two. So it is about to me, leadership is how you turn up. You have to be transparent, you have to be open, and you certainly have to have a set of values that are attractive to the people that work with you. It doesn't mean about being soft, by the way.
It's interesting you mentioned the word energy there. I think that's something that we kind of talk about a hell of a lot. Have we got any else coming?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Just picking up on what Graham said, kind of starts to answer that in terms of developing that leadership, that self leadership, and what methods do we use as leaders to develop the way that we lead and to develop the future leaders or other leaders within our organisation. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the kind of the key things that are important in that approach and methodology that you just touched on there.
Well, yeah, as I say, we start with having leaders look at themselves deeply, look into how they've developed as an individual, understanding, it's a little bit of EQ, if you like, emotional intelligence, understanding their triggers. What people don't like are people that are inconsistent. They don't like their bosses to be inconsistent. Well, one day they're all happy and smiley, how you doing? And then another day they bite your heads off. They're just not in control of their emotional system whatsoever. So we take them through a process of really deeply getting to understand themselves, their triggers, their behaviours, and also to think about, as I say, their purpose, the purpose of why they do what they do, their values set, in other words, what's important to them, how they turn up, and their vision for themselves, for their leadership in the future. So it's a whole process. They start from the beginning, looking at their lives, and they go right through to looking then to the future. And it's remarkable, really, the results that it can have, where men and women join our programs and at the end of it come away with a completely different view of themselves and the way they've been operating and the way they need to operate in the future.
From my sort of experience of working with people at the top of organisations that are seeking to change the organisation in some way, to plan and implement a strategy, I suppose a couple of points to make. One, it's an extremely lonely job for a lot of people. But the second point, and it probably keys into what you just said, Graham, is that it's very good to be able to stand back from time to time.
It's essential.
If it's it might be a course, it might just be some time in the day, it might be a coach or mentor, but sustaining those sorts of leadership credentials and the ability to operate in this fourth industrial revolution, day to day. It doesn't just happen. I think, all of us as leaders need to think about, kind of downtime, maintenance time in order to stay on top of this.
Interesting, this was a very similar conversation, or part of that we had in our first episode. We're talking to Matt, and he was talking about, actually, if I'm a great CEO, I probably don't, I don't have any tasks. My thing is to kind of guide the organisation rather than thinking how do I fill up my diary. So you remember that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting that you just mentioned about kind of the use of coaching and mentoring, because one of our viewers has just asked us, have you ever used a coach and a mentor? And I know that's something that you work on also, Graham, and would you recommend it, in terms of personal leadership development?
I would. I've sort of been, both sides of the fence really, and if you can get the right match, I think between the mentor, and we can debate over differences between coaches and mentors, but essentially that sort of sounding board, I think it is invaluable, because in a kind of non-judgmental, safe environment, it gives the ability to do some exploration of areas that you probably wouldn't want to explore, with your colleagues. So I'd certainly advocate that.
Hiding in your own kind of corner without actually going into the place that you don't really want to go. But it's being challenged, I think.
Absolutely.
An interesting thing.
At the end of the day, nobody has all the answers. We're confined to the paradigm of our own thinking, our own, our own understanding or perception of the world. So we need coaches to be able to take us outside of that sometimes, and use the old saying, thinking outside the box. One thing is for sure with this new era that we're moving into, it's not about how do we do things, but how we do things differently, and that takes a whole different mindset.
Interesting. Fantastic. I think we've run out of time already, and it's always I always want to have these conversations for another hour. We almost want to get going. So just to say, Graham, thank you very much. Peter,
Pleasure.
Thank you so much as well. Kylie, any thoughts before we go?
No, obviously we're really keen to have questions for our next episode, so please do engage in the streams, pose us questions for the next episode using the hashtag ExecEducationTV or on any of our social media platforms. And our next episode is What Makes a Transformational Leader?
Exactly, yeah. Well, join us next time for our stream to say what makes a transformational leader. So we've been Regent Leadership Live. Hope to speak to you soon.